Welcome back to the deep dive. You've handed us an absolutely spectacular stack of source material today. It really defies any single genre. It feels like a historical document, a high seas adventure, a quest, and a memoir all at once.
It's a fantastic mix, isn't it? I mean, usually we're digging through policy papers or, some pretty dry research, but this feels like we've been handed the script for some epic film.
It really does.
So our mission today, I think, is to trace this incredibly unlikely protagonist, Tully Mars. He's an ex-cowboy from Wyoming, and we're following his path from the Bitterroot Mountains all the way to these hidden coves in the Caribbean.
And it's all driven by this one singular hunt for a legendary and seemingly irreplaceable piece of optical engineering.
That's the core of it. We're looking at the history, the people, and the real material cost of restoring this beacon of light. It's literally a search for what the sources call the soul of the light.
Okay, so let's unpack this right away. Our hero, Tully, is on the run from the law, and he somehow ends up joining a 101-year-old schooner captain on this quest.
Precisely. The whole story revolves around finding a very specific, high-precision instrument, a bullseye lens, which is a key part of the Fresnel lens system. It's all about restoring the lighthouse at a place called Cayo Loco.
And the entire narrative, it seems, hinges on the relationship between Tully Mars and this captain, Cleopatra Highborn.
She's a force of nature, 101 years old, captain of her schooner, the Lucretia, which becomes the vessel for this global treasure hunt.
So to really appreciate how wild this journey is, we have to start where Tully starts. We need to understand his starting line.
Absolutely. The sources paint such a vivid picture of his origins, and it's so far from the ocean. We're in Heartache, Wyoming, right near the Bitterroot Mountains.
And his childhood was shaped by this very specific, almost mythic American dream.
Yeah, emulating Roy Rogers, the quintessential moral cowboy, But his fantasy wasn't really about herding cattle. It was about becoming that archetype, the good man who handles danger with integrity and a clear conscience.
And his main line to the world outside that very isolated landscape in Wyoming and Montana, was his father's prized possession, a pretty sophisticated piece of tech for the time.
The Hallicrafter shortwave radio. It's important for you to remember, this wasn't like turning on an FM radio today. This was a complex machine.
Right.
And Tully's father, being this practical man, he understood the sort of magic behind shortwave propagation. You had these big green dials, a very sensitive tuning knob, and with it, Tully could pull in signals that felt impossible.
We're talking about signals that bounced across thousands of miles. The sources mention the BBC from Hong Kong.
Exactly. Broadcasting news and classical music from the South China Sea, or, these faint Polynesian melodies filtering in from Hawaii.
And how does that even work scientifically?
It's fantastic, really. Shortwave signals, they could literally bounce off the Earth's ionosphere, especially at night, allowing them to travel these huge distances.
Yeah.
So for a boy in landlocked Wyoming, that Hallicrafter wasn't just a radio.
It was a window.
It was a window into the entire global maritime network. The tropics, the ocean, it all came to him first through static and melody long before he ever saw a coastline. It introduced him to a world of constant movement, which is the complete opposite of a fixed ranching life.
But that same piece of technology that promised this amazing world, it also delivered incredible tragedy.
The sources are very clear on this. It was over that same radio that Tully first heard the reports of a plane crash, and then the subsequent avalanche that buried and killed his father, who was out there trying to rescue the survivors in the Bitterroot Mountains.
So it creates this really poignant, almost fated beginning for him. The world that promised excitement also delivered this profound loss.
And that loss really becomes the foundation for Tully's need to keep moving, and also for his reliance on this very powerful, almost mystical good luck charm.
Okay, let's talk about that charm. It's a conch shell, and it's a deeply symbolic object in this story.
It is. It wasn't just some trinket he found. It was given to him by a man named Johnny Red Dust,
who was an old war buddy of Tully's father.
Right. They were connected through something the source calls the Forgotten War. And we also forget that part of World War II involved this intense, brutal fighting in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska against the Japanese.
Just an unbelievably harsh environment.
Extreme cold, grueling combat.
Yeah.
They survived that together, and then they finished out the war stationed in Hawaii. So the history of that shell is literally fire and ice, snow and tropical heat, all wrapped up in one object.
And Johnny Red Dust wasn't just a soldier. He was a respected medicine man on the reservation in eastern Montana.
Yeah, and Tully's family kept up that relationship. He and his father would go to the annual Crow Fair at Little Bighorn every fall. His dad had this deep respect for Native American traditions. He believed they needed to, quote, charge up our good luck streak.
And the shell was meant to be the conduit for that luck.
The magic of it, according to the source material, is that if you hold it up to your ear, you don't just hear the sound of waves, you hear the song of the ocean. A literal, emotional connection to the sea.
He kept it his whole life, saw it as this protective entity, almost.
He did. Which makes the moment it disappears one of the most absurd scenes in the entire narrative. A surprise attack by a massive pack of raccoons.
A raccoon-induced existential crisis. They ransacked his trailer and stole a string of rainbow trout.
And the shell along with it. But then later he finds it again, just sitting in the snow. And this marks a definitive new beginning for him. The sources really imply that finding that shell was a sign his luck had turned right before his life is about to take this massive turn south.
And he was going to need that luck because he wasn't heading south on vacation. He was running.
Fleeing, yeah. He had committed an act of, let's say, vandalism against a very powerful and highly unpleasant person.
Let's talk about the antagonist. Thelma Barston, the ruthless ranch owner Tully, had nicknamed the Ranch Nazi.
And you can tell from that nickname, their relationship wasn't great. He busted her plate glass window in a moment of fury, and she responded by putting a very large bounty on his head.
Which is how he ends up on the radar of Waldo and Wilton Stilton.
The Stiltons are just fascinating. They represent this very specific kind of American criminal evolution. They're described as third-generation ne'er-do-wells.
But their family history shows this transition in crime from outright violence to something more sophisticated?
Exactly. Their great-grandfather was a classic outlaw, hanged outside Livingston, Montana, for robbing people with guns. The next generation, his kids, they realized that violence was messy, so they transitioned to what the source calls robbing them with fountain pens.
So, fraud, white-collar crime.
Acquiring vast wealth, corporate positions, political connections, basically legitimizing their criminal intent through respectability. But Waldo and Wilton, they were kind of the diluted, less effective heirs to this empire, left trying to capture a cowboy with a stun gun.
And Tully gets the stark reminder of how close they are when he briefly spots them at this incredibly bizarre local event.
The mullet toss in Alabama. It's one of those fantastic, regionally specific details. It's a contest where people literally throw dead mullet fish across the state line.
As an excuse for a huge party.
A huge party, a beauty pageant, and a surprisingly competitive sporting event. And seeing the Stilton brothers there, it solidifies Tully's decision. The mainland U.S. is too hot. He has to get further away. He needs the Caribbean.
But this flight south isn't entirely random. It's driven by something deeper, right? An ancestral pull connected to two pieces of art he carried with him.
Yes, two crucial visual talismans. One was a symbolic painting, the patron saint of lightning. The other was a black and white engraving of a famous painting, Heart of the Andes, by Frederick Edwin Church.
Church is one of the giants of the Hudson River School, known for these absolutely massive, breathtaking landscape paintings.
He was, and he was heavily influenced by the German naturalist and explorer Alexander von Humboldt. Humboldt believed that studying the natural world was the highest form of intellectual pursuit.
And Church's goal with Heart of the Andes was to capture that.
It was to create a heroic landscape painting. It was meant to educate and inspire audiences in New York and London about the sublime beauty of the South American tropics, places most of them would never, ever get to see in person.
And this is where Tully's own family history intersects with high art.
Exactly. His almost great-grandmother, Sarah Sawyer Mars, they called her Grandma Ghost, she saw the original painting when it toured in the 1860s. And the sources describe its effect on her as profound, almost catalytic.
She left a note for her family,
saying she felt her destiny calling her south, that she had to follow this artistic vision of paradise. The family story is that she literally walked into that painting of the tropics and just never returned.
So she established this clear Mars family legacy. Tully isn't just running from the law. He's fulfilling an inherited geographical destiny. He's chasing an emotional echo set in motion over a century ago.
It connects his rootlessness to a search for a more profound sense of belonging. And that path, it leads him directly to Cleopatra and Cayo Loco.
So Tully finally arrives at Cayo Loco, home of this dilapidated lighthouse. He gets there on the Lucretia's dinghy, and his first thought about lighthouses is incredibly practical.
Yeah, he realizes they don't mark safe harbors, they mark trouble. Shipwrecks, rocky shores, danger.
And Cleopatra, she seems to sense his skepticism, and she immediately starts setting the stage. She tells him how she got Cayo Loco in the first place.
She did. She secured it from these, bumbling bureaucrats in Nassau. She traded them a building for a Junkanoo museum in exchange for the island.
We should probably pause on that term, Junkanoo.
It's a crucial piece of Bahamian culture. It's this massive, rhythmic street parade, a celebration with music, dance, and these incredible, elaborate costumes made of crepe paper. By mentioning a Junkanoo museum, the source is telling you that Cleopatra operates in a world where culture and history are commodities just as valuable as land.
And Cayo Loco, specifically the area around the lighthouse, Punta Margarita, has this notorious history. It was founded on maritime predation.
Absolutely. It started as a pirate outpost, first used by Blackbeard. He learned the secrets of the treacherous offshore reefs from local indigenous fishermen.
But the village itself was really established by Jean Lafitte.
The famous Jean Lafitte, hero of the Battle of New Orleans. But the sources are quick to point out he was a brilliant military strategist, but a terrible businessman.
He tried to go legitimate after the war, and it just didn't work.
Failed spectacularly. He quickly went back to piracy, fled the U.S. Navy, and established his favorite secret hideout at a place called Crocodile Rock. It was sheltered between two promontories, guarded by shallow water and those reefs. A perfect defensive position.
And once piracy became too risky, the locals didn't just pack up and leave, they evolved their business model.
They pivoted. They adopted the wrecking trade. And the sources are very clear. This was not accidental salvage work. This was a thriving, organized, illicit industry.
They would just wait for ships to hit the reef.
Which they did with amazing regularity for nearly 100 years. And then they pillaged the cargo. The local fishermen knew the currents and the hazards better than anyone, which, leads to the suggestion that maybe they weren't entirely passive observers of these maritime disasters.
And this trade was shockingly profitable. It transformed Punta Margarita into a highly sophisticated, if illegally funded, settlement.
The wealth supported an opera house. That alone speaks to a commitment to high culture and luxury. But the most telling detail, for me, is the logistics of their dirty laundry.
This is an incredible detail.
Because the remote village didn't have a proper high-quality laundry service, they regularly sent their linens on a scheduled boat trip, all the way to New Orleans for washing.
A scheduled 1,000-mile luxury laundry service funded by shipwrecks. That one detail speaks volumes about the level of wealth they were generating.
Eventually, that prosperity waned as global navigation improved. The opera house burned down, and poetically, the laundry ship sank. The wrecking trade became a relic.
And the state of the lighthouse now is the entire reason for Tully's involvement. Cleopatra tells him the tower's soul was ripped out. We need to stop and explain exactly what that soul was.
The soul was the original precision-crafted Fresnel lens system. To understand the tragedy, you really have to understand the technology. The Fresnel lens, invented in 1823 by Augustin Jean Fresnel, it revolutionized maritime safety.
Before that, lighthouses just used simple mirrors and huge lamps, right? And lost most of the light.
Exactly. The Fresnel lens changed everything. You use these concentric rings of prisms, not just one big curved piece of glass, to refract and focus the light into a single, powerful parallel beam.
It's an incredible piece of engineering.
It dramatically magnified the light source, projecting it dozens of miles out to sea with far less fuel. And the Cayo Loco light used a very specific, highly efficient version called the bullseye lens, the pinnacle of optical engineering at the time.
And when the light was decommissioned,
What did they do?
They severed the entire brass frame holding this masterpiece with a blowtorch, shoved it out the window, and sold it for scrap metal.
The ultimate cultural vandalism. And it was replaced by what Cleopatra called a giant toaster. Probably some crude, less powerful, rotating floodlight. So her singular mission became finding an original bullseye lens to replace it. She calls it a needle in a haystack thing.
And this immediately leads to Tully's first big test, proving his nautical worth in Lafitte's old waters. He's looking at the charts, and they're covered in skulls and crossbones.
Understandably intimidated. But Captain Kirk, the Lucretia's first mate, he introduces Tully to the legendary Pirate's Guide to the Channel.
And it's this incredibly smart natural navigation system.
It is. Kirk pulls out this miniature brass cannel Lafitte's original device and explains the markers. The channel into Crocodile Rock is lined with these stone pilings that all look identical.
So how do you tell the real markers from the decoys?
You fire the cannon, it uses a large shotgun shell, creates this massive concussive sound, And the genius of the system is in how the birds respond.
Of course.
The real birds, the ones resting on the fake decoys, they get startled by the noise and immediately take flight. The birds that remain are actually decoys themselves, and those are your channel markers.
So Tully has to learn to read the silence of the birds.
He does. And he successfully weaves the schooner along that tight, shallow channel, proving that he can master this mix of ancient pirate knowledge and modern seamanship.
And with that, he's firmly established in Cleopatra's world. So let's really delve into her. This is a character so rich in history, she basically encapsulates the entire 20th century.
Cleopatra Highborn is 101 years old. And is a truly remarkable figure. She's not just old, she's a living encyclopedia of history, nautical wisdom, anthropology. And her life began amid one of the most chaotic moments in late 19th century history.
Let's dive deep into her origins. Havana, 1898. Her mother, Lucretia Cannon Metter, is 8 months pregnant.
And her father is a naval attaché dining with the commander of the USS Maine.
The scene in Havana was already tense, but it was also a party.
It was Mardi Gras. The city was just enveloped in this huge street party, a mix of joy and revolution. Revolutionaries were secretly using the chaos to smuggle French weapons into the city, sometimes in the hold of ships like the Neptunia, which would later become the Lucretia.
And then the explosion, the catastrophic, history-altering event.
The sheer shockwave and the concussive force from the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. It sent her mother immediately into labor.
The streets would have been total gridlock, Mardi Gras revelers, people fleeing the explosion.
No way to get to a hospital, so Lucretia was carried into the nearest available shelter, a tiny barbershop on Avenida Obispo near the Plaza de Armas, claimed to be the oldest barbershop in the New World.
And the owner, a working barber, delivered the baby right there in the barber chair.
Her naming ceremony was just as dramatic. Lucretia looked up at this fading Egyptian mural on the barbershop wall and just declared, "Call her Cleopatra. She already looks like she is in charge."
Tragically, her own father perished that morning in the harbor.
Yes. But as they were leaving, the grateful barber gifted the family this large, carved wooden toy box, about the size of a beer case for the baby, and that toy box becomes critically important later on.
The sea was truly in her bloodline. Her family were Key West loyalists who fled the American Revolution for Abaco in the Bahamas back in 1783.
And her personal nautical legacy was cemented on her 18th birthday. Her father, Patrick Highborn, bought the schooner Neptunia, the very ship that was in Havana Harbor the night she was born, and he renamed it the Lucretia in honor of her mother. This deep, multi-generational connection to specific vessels and historical moments. It just gives Cleopatra this immense gravitas.
And beyond her maritime life, she had these two intense, almost devotional cultural passions. The first was Argentine tango.
A profound love for the master, Carlos Gardel. He was tragically killed in a plane crash in 1935, but Gardel's not just a musician, he's a mythological figure in South America. Cleopatra described his song Tomo y Obligo as life and death played out in a few verses.
And her devotion to this legend is still active a century later.
Yes. The sources detail this continuing ritual at his tomb in Buenos Aires. Fans still light and place a fresh cigarette in the hand of the life-size statue there. This ongoing interaction with the dead, keeping his legend alive. Cleopatra appreciated it deeply. She called it better than the tourist devotion you see at Graceland.
Her other great love was Cuban baseball, specifically a pitcher named El Coyote the Rocket.
She was a manic, shameless fan of the Havana Industrials, and the specific anecdote the sources share is just remarkable. El Coyote pitched a perfect game, a feat of incredible concentration and athleticism, despite having learned just hours before that his own father had died.
Wow.
For Cleopatra, this encapsulated the Cuban spirit, the ability to compartmentalize grief and loss and commit entirely to the task at hand. It really speaks to her own century-long dedication to her life's mission.
And this wealth of experience and knowledge is immediately tested when Tully brings her a theory from his part-time academic work.
Right. Tully had been assisting a Dr. Destin Walker who theorized that the ancient Mayan tower at Tulum El Castillo wasn't just a temple. He believed it was a functional maritime navigation tool.
The idea was that the small windows and specific angles of the tower were precisely calculated to act as a guide system for trading ships, but only visible at a very specific time.
At sunrise. So Cleopatra, intrigued by this blend of astronomy and ancient engineering, she wagers Tully a ride home on the Lucretia if he can prove the system works.
But the sun isn't rising, so Tully has to run the channel in the dark, replicating the light pattern with torches.
Exactly. The sources describe him in the dinghy radioing the guard, Hector, who has placed torches inside the tower's windows. Tully has to perfectly line up the resulting squares of light, calculating the correct path through this shallow skull and crossbones riddled channel.
And it works.
The Mayan calculation proves flawless. In just under 10 minutes, he successfully navigates the channel using lay patterns designed millennia ago. He proves that this ancient culture possessed this sophisticated, practical understanding of maritime engineering and astronomy. And he wins his passage.
The wager fulfilled, Tully is safely back on the mainland, but the global hunt for the bullseye lens is just ramping up. He realizes he needs broader expertise and reaches out to a man whose life is defined by high-stakes adventure.
Willie Singer, a fantastic addition to this cast of characters. He's a popular music star who became even more famous later in life for his exploits as a treasure hunter and surfing expert.
His claim to fame was a massive find off a Spanish galleon, right?
The largest cache of ancient black pearls, Chinese porcelain, and gold bars ever recovered from a galleon wreck near the Philippines. He understands the value of rare objects and the logistics of global recovery.
Tully writes this very personal, pleading letter, and Willie immediately accepts the mission. He takes his antique seaplane, the Flying Pearl, across the Pacific.
And his journey begins with this moment of pure flair that gets him into immediate trouble. As a tribute to the plane's original owner, a man named Bert Brown, Willie flies the Flying Pearl directly under the Golden Gate Bridge.
Which is completely illegal.
And a spectacular stunt that gets immediate media attention and a stern talking to from air traffic control. Willie's excuse, blaming it on excessive load of fuel, lack of a headwind, and a litany of other problems, is just pure showmanship.
His search for a Fresnel lens takes him deep into the South Pacific to New Caledonia, a French territory, where he immediately runs into some high-level geopolitical friction.
He has to deal with the French DGSE, the Directorate General for External Security. They're basically the French CIA, but we have to remember their highly controversial history. The source explicitly says they're the same people who, in 1985, blew up the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbor.
And that context is crucial. The Rainbow Warrior bombing was an act of state-sponsored terrorism. It was intended to sabotage protests against French nuclear testing in the Pacific.
So Willie Singer, a visible American figure flying this recognizable seaplane into a region that's very sensitive to colonial and nuclear tensions, he's viewed with immediate suspicion.
He and his crew are detained.
Interrogated for 4 hours by chain-smoking officers with automatic rifles. He's eventually rescued by a cultural attaché, Philippe Parfait, who concocts this absurd but necessary cover story. Willie and his crew are forced to pose as movie stars filming a documentary.
Just a fabrication to ease tensions caused by local rebel activity.
Exactly. And Parfait eventually directs Willie to a promising lead, the Amity Light in New Caledonia. Willie confirms it uses a Fresnel lens, and he describes it beautifully as looking like a small glass cathedral.
That's a great description. The intricate prisms, the geometric structure.
Yeah.
It does resemble cathedral glass.
But the lens is in use, so it's not for sale.
No?
Parfait, though, gives Willie a key hint that leads to the next and even stranger leg of the journey, the island of Dalvalo in Vanuatu.
And this is where we encounter the Captain Kidd cargo cult.
This is a deep anthropological detour. Cargo cults are a fascinating post-World War II phenomenon that arose in Melanesia. Local populations saw these massive influxes of American military personnel and supplies, the cargo, delivered by planes and ships.
And then the war ended, the Westerners left, and the cargo stopped coming.
Right. So the locals rationalized this by concluding that the Westerners must have possessed some secret ritual knowledge to summon the cargo, so they created their own rites intended to make the supplies return.
So Willie lands on Dalvalo, home of the Kiddos, who worship the idea of a missing WWII Navy pilot named Captain Kidd.
And Willie, arriving in his antique seaplane, is immediately hailed as a messenger. He meets the leader, Waltham, who confirms the existence of a Fresnel lens.
But it's not being used for navigation.
No, it's housed in a sacred tower on the volcano rim, intended solely as a beacon to guide Captain Kidd home. The lens itself was recovered from surplus material after a PBY patrol plane, based at Espiritu Santo, crashed nearby after being hit by volcanic debris during an eruption.
So the lens can't be taken. But Waltham gives Willie a truly significant artifact.
A tangible link to the myth's origin. Captain Kidd's inscribed watch. It's a spring-wound Waltham Watch Company watch, etched with "To LTJD Kidd Pensacola 1940. It grounds the whole belief in specific history, and crucially, Waltham shares the truly incredible news. There is a spare bulb,
A second Fresnel lens.
one that Kidd had recovered from surplus but was never installed in the sacred tower.
So that's the pivotal moment of the Pacific Search. But back in Belize, Tully Mars's luck, despite his conch shell, just runs out in spectacular fashion.
The Stilton brothers, Waldo and Wilton, they finally locate him in San Pedro, Belize, during the height of spring break at the infamous Belly of the Beast bar.
A place described with some dark humor as being full of people migrating to warmer latitudes for sex and drinking.
And that's where they get him. Tully is captured, shocked with a stun gun, and chained up near a deserted airstrip. Thelma Barston is expected to land her chartered prison plane to take him back to Wyoming. He's completely immobilized, tied to a large hardwood tree.
But the Stiltons, in their arrogance, they commit the perfect modern blunder.
Which is what enables his rescue, and the rescue team is truly global. Bucky Norman, his acquaintance from Wyoming, Captain Kirk, Ixnay, the Mayan guide, and Archibald Archie Mercer.
A former British sergeant and owner of a highly organized safari outfit.
And the crucial intel came from Waldo Stilton himself. High on his momentary victory, he couldn't stop bragging. After shocking Tully, he recorded the entire planned Thelma's arrival time, the exact location on Archie Mercer's satellite phone answering machine.
He forgot to hang up the phone.
Tully's survival was contingent not on ancient magic, but on sheer incompetence.
The tactic they used to rescue him is this highly staged military-grade distraction they call a photo safari thing.
Archie Mercer, leveraging his military background and his resources, arrives in the Land Rover, now christened the Fishmobile. He's accompanied by Ixnay and his safari workers, all dressed for a photo expedition.
Archie starts the confrontation with this absurd pretext of a botched picnic.
He challenges Waldo about the chained man, suggesting Tully must be punished for forgetting the potato salad. When Waldo predictably pulls a gun, Archie's team springs the trap.
A brilliant use of misdirection.
The Stiltons and their security guards are completely overwhelmed by this sudden theatrical confrontation. It allows Tully to be freed just moments before Thelma Barston's prison plane lands. He escapes through a combination of ancient knowledge from Ixnay and modern organized chaos from Archie.
And as Tully is fleeing his antagonist, the main mission, the search for the bullseye lens, comes to the most spectacular and ironic conclusion you can imagine.
The irony is just breathtaking. Willie Singer, flying thousands of miles across the globe, searching sacred towers, dealing with geopolitical crises. He calls Tully with the news.
The lens is found.
And it was located, not in the South Pacific, but in a junkyard on the Miami River, barely a mile from the Highborn Shipping Company dock. It was in Cleopatra's literal backyard the entire time.
The sheer cost in time and energy only for it to be found right there.
It just highlights the difficulty of locating these hyper-specific historical artifacts. And Willie Singer, he recognized the non-negotiable value of the piece. He didn't haggle. He asked the price, wired the money immediately, and secured it on the spot.
Cleopatra, Diver, and Tully head to the junkyard in a U-Haul. The 101-year-old captain, after a decade-long search, she confirms it's real. She calls it a hell-ever Christmas ornament.
And her immediate proclamation sets the timeline. I think we were meant to bring in the new millennium with this light.
Which sets this incredible deadline. They have less than 3 weeks to install the lens and light the tower on New Year's Eve, the very end of the 20th century.
It was a logistical undertaking of monumental proportions. The capital was secretly provided by Sammy Ray Coconuts, who had taken a keen interest in the venture, alongside Captain Kirk. They sourced the vintage petroleum burner, the hand pumps, piping, pressure tanks, everything needed for the original lens system.
But the real challenge was the missing internal hardware, the specialized gears and housing for the lens to rotate.
This is where modern technology married historical preservation. A young MIT engineer was commandeered to design and manufacture those missing components.
And the sources highlight the specific material they used.
Titanium. This is a crucial detail. It speaks to the commitment to longevity. Titanium is incredibly strong, corrosion-resistant, and lightweight.
So it would withstand the salt air.
For another century. They were essentially turning Cayo Loco into a kind of space-age lighthouse built around a 19th century lens.
The final effort is depicted as this massive cross-cultural community endeavor.
On New Year's Eve, the tower is freshly painted in its massive candy-striped colors. Then, a bucket brigade forms. This crew of lighthouse nuts, passing jugs of fossil fuel up the freshly varnished steps to fill the tanks.
And the crew includes everyone.
Ixnay, Willie Singer, Captain Kirk, Sammy Ray, Parfait, a truly international cast of characters, all united by this one light.
And shortly before midnight, on the last day of the 20th century, the bullseye lens flashes for the first time in nearly 50 years.
And the light is instantly validated. Not by a passing ship, but by a lost, ruby-throated hummingbird, a tiny traveler flying all the way from Nova Scotia who lands on Tully's arm.
That's just profound symbolism. The light has returned, and it guides the smallest, most vulnerable traveler. It confirms the purpose of the whole immense effort. And soon after, Cleopatra's own extraordinary voyage comes to an end.
She dies, appropriately, on Mardi Gras Day, the exact anniversary of her birth in 1898 Havana. And her exit was as meticulously planned as the rest of her life.
Her instructions were very detailed.
A mahogany coffin, cremation at Osprey Point on Cayo Loco, and her ashes were to be placed in that wooden toy box, the chest gifted by the barber at her chaotic birth and buried under a palm tree facing Cuba.
And the toy box was filled not just with her ashes, but with artifacts representing her greatest passions.
Alcosi signed baseball for her love of the Cuban game, and bags of Havana earth and conch shells to anchor her to her birthplace in the sea.
And the final ceremony itself was a unique and moving Garifuna custom.
The dance of life and death. The Garifuna are descendants of West African, Arawak, and Carib people. This custom is a specific, rhythmic spiritual procession, usually reserved for revered community leaders.
Tully leads the funeral entourage in a wagon harnessed to a horse named Mr. Twain, rowing the body and spirit to the cremation site.
Accompanied by the haunting voice of Carlos Gardel, playing from a ghetto blaster. It's a perfect blend of solemnity, cultural ritual, and personal passion.
Tully tries to give his lucky conch shell to Cleopatra,
saying its purpose was fulfilled, but she gently presses it back into his hand and says, "My luck is just about run out, but I'm sure you will find someone who will need it more than me." It's a final piece of wisdom and a prophecy for Tully's future.
And with that, the soul of the light is secured, the captain's legacy is sealed, and Tully Mars finally faces the legal outcome that allows him to stop running.
He's truly free. The sources confirm the end of his legal peril with some highly situational irony. Thelma Barston is gone.
He gets a report that she was turned into an instant popsicle by an avalanche.
An avalanche triggered by gunshots. The Wyoming landscape that defined his need to flee ultimately resolves his conflict with a frigid final justice.
The paperwork arrives, stamped "case dismissed." He no longer has to run, but that urge to keep moving begins to stir again.
His journey concludes with him heading toward Key West, but not before he completes this emotional transition by meeting the highborn family's next generation. While fishing, he encounters Sophie Diamond and her young daughter, Montana.
And the conversation reveals that Sophie is Cleopatra's grandniece, the granddaughter of Teddy Diamond, Cleopatra's beloved stepbrother. The legacy continues.
It leads to this very important line from Sophie, which redefines the concept of paradise for Tully. She notices he isn't wearing shoes and says that when you don't, then you are closer to eating than you think.
It's a philosophy of presence, simplicity, immediate gratitude. It's so different from the complex, expensive paradise defined by art that drove his ancestors south.
He immediately accepts a job as the first male crew member on Sophie's boat, the Blue Dream sailing them to Key West.
And this is where Cleopatra's final prophecy is fulfilled.
He finally hands the lucky conch shell, the talisman of his life's movement, to Montana, the new generation of seafaring adventurers. He closes her small hand around her new good luck charm, signaling that he no longer needs to rely on external luck. He's found his own path.
And the future of Cayo Loco is secured. Ixnay stays on as the light tender, with Daver, Solomon's son.
Having fallen in love with the purpose of maintaining the light, and backed by Sammy Ray coconuts, Ixnay plans to build his own boat, named Cleopatra, and sail around the world.
So Tully's saga concludes with him arriving in Key West. He's riding a used bicycle, exploring the small island. He's free, connected to a new family, but he still feels that familiar, lingering urge to move on again. The journey of finding the light is over, but the journey of movement continues.
It is just staggering when you think about the scope of this adventure. I mean, from a small plate glass window in Wyoming, to dealing with the DGSE in New Caledonia, to a cargo cult in Vanuatu. All connected by one man's need to run and a century-old woman's need to find a single, precise piece of glass.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is the integrated theme of knowledge and legacy. The value of the quest was never just about finding the bullseye lens in a Miami junkyard.
No, not at all. It was in the community of highly specialized knowledge required to bring that light back to life.
You needed the Mayan shamans who knew how to guide a boat through the channel, the nautical historians like Cleopatra, the pirates who defined the routes in the first place,
the treasure hunter to locate the relic, and the MIT engineers to build the titanium housing. It really proves that knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied, and that it requires a synthesis of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge technology.
Which raises an important question, and it loops all the way back to Pele's ancestry and that painting, The Heart of the Andes.
Right. That painting convinced his almost great-grandmother that paradise was a permanent geographical pursuit. It caused her to walk away from her past entirely.
But Tully, he finds his liberation and his future in the companionship of Sophie in Montana, even while he retains that familiar urge to move.
So, given his ultimate destination in Key West, a place of perpetual motion and transition, and his connection to the rave blue, the blue dream, does the source material suggest that paradise is truly a fixed location? Or is it, as Sophie implies, simply being closer to eating than you think with the right company and just embracing the joy of constant movement?